In what is a big claim by Donald Trump on election meddling in India, the US president has said that $21 million of US aid was given to India because the Biden administration was trying to get someone else elected. While speaking at the FII Priority Summit in Miami, Trump questioned why the money was being sent to India without giving out any details of the recipients.
$21 million for voter turnout in India. What do we need to spend $21 million for voter turnout in India? Wow, $21 million. I guess they were trying to get somebody else elected. Wow, we ought to tell the Indian government, because when we hear that Russia spent about $2 in our country, it was a big deal, right? They took some internet ads for $2,000. This is a total breakthrough. $21 million for India elections.
Now, Donald Trump's remarks, remember, came days after the U.S. Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, disclosed that the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, was giving $21 million to boost voter turnout in India. Now, even though it has led to a domestic war of words here in India, US aid and its expenditure has been in focus since Donald Trump assumed office and formed DOGE, led by his friend Elon Musk. From DEI-related events across countries to tourism promotion in Egypt, as per the White House, US aid has been spent on what Trump calls waste and abuse of US taxpayers' money. Now, interestingly, US aid also funds a lot of programs of healthcare, education, sanitation, and social welfare across various countries in the world, particularly in Africa and West Asia. For instance, in Ukraine, before and after US aid for budget and war support, the picture isn't very rosy. Ukraine's GDP fell amid the war. In Nigeria, on the other hand, despite a US aid assistance for healthcare, the country didn't see much improvement in, say, diseases like HIV/AIDS. The GDP declined, and they still struggle with governance. But the question is, what has been achieved out of this big spending? And when would Donald Trump actually give out the details of who received how much money across countries, including here in India, as he has claimed? To talk more about this, I am joined by Dr. Richard Benkin, author and geopolitical analyst. I'm also joined by Republican strategist David Sofair. We're also expecting Dr. Michael Owens, Mayor Mableton, to join us in a short while from now. David Sofair, let me begin with you. Many say that these are just claims made by Donald Trump, and perhaps, we should wait and watch because he still hasn't given out any details. He's just making some statements that are not substantiated with solid proof.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And when it comes to USAID, I mean, if you look at a lot of this, there is so much waste here. When it comes to the endless aid packages that were sent, it's not the only election that money went to as well. They had it in Bolivia. They also had it in Brazil as well. To say it's election interference is something else. Now, when it has 10,000 employees as well, I mean, it's in typical Washington, D.C. fashion, it's 10,000 people doing the jobs of 300, which I think is what they're actually going to cut it down to. Now, USAID is not being cut completely. It's being restructured. So it's important for your viewers to know that as well. So whilst we are cost cutting and actively making our budget, we're trimming down the national deficit in America, and we are the party of democracy, and we are actively cutting down the bureaucracy. So there's been a lot of wastage in USAID, especially when, if you see some of the numbers, they sent about $4 million to our friends in London at the BBC. Now, that's not a country or an organization that needs our aid. It's just the list goes on and on. And the other thing is, once these countries get the aid, who's in charge of implementing it? You put the statistics on Nigeria or whatever, where they were a huge benefactor of USAID, and it's done a negligible to a non-existent effect there on the prescribed thing. So, I think it'd be a bold thing to say, but I'm just going to come out and say it, that it seems to be a slush fund for special interest groups, big government, and our friends, the Democrats.
Okay, Dr. Richard, what do you make of it? These are big claims, and I understand the kind of reasons that, the Trump administration is listing out almost every second day why they need this cut in US aid, why they need to restructure this entire program. But what do you make of it, considering also the fact that it has now come under the US State Department?
First of all, I agree with what Mr. Saffair said, absolutely. And I'm going to go back. You mentioned the State Department. I'm going back to what Secretary of State Rubio said when these were put on directly under him. He said there are some good programs in USAID. I don't think the administration or the State Department wants to just trash every program it has. However, we do know there's a lot of waste, a lot of fraud, a lot of abuse, and these things have for years have kind of gone unaudited, unchecked, and that's what we're getting here. That's one of the reasons why the American people elected President Trump, was to bring some sanity to our spending. And when we say our spending, it's really the spending of the people, the American people. And so I think, just as you would in any business, any organization, you really need to take a close look at your spending and decide what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, instead of just renewing these things. The other thing, I've seen how the budgetary process goes, and it's not neat, it's not clean, whether it's in the United States or anywhere else. But I know in the United States, there might be programs that were authorized for a particular reason or to satisfy a specific constituency. And when those immediate needs stop, rather than looking at it again and determining whether or not they're actually helping the taxpayers who are funding it, they just go on and on. I think a great example is that $21 million to increase voter turnout in India. Now, how stupid is that? I think India could do a better, could teach us something about voter turnout. If you look at the numbers of turnout, I also I think it's significant that in mentioning that, President Trump tipped his hat to Prime Minister Modi by saying perhaps that money was being used to try and get someone else elected. And we know that the Biden and Obama administrations were rather hostile to Prime Minister Modi.
Okay. Dr. Michael Owens has also joined us on the broadcast. Dr. Owens, there has been a lot of talk about US aid, and now, of course, that big claim coming in from Donald Trump as far as alleged election interference in India is concerned. He surely hasn't given out any details, but what do you make of this entire focus on restructuring US aid, cutting down on the funds that are provided for, say, sectors like healthcare, education to various countries?
First for having me on, and I really think this to.
All right, I believe there is some sort of network issue there. We'll try and fix that issue. But let me go across to you, David Saffair. My only question is, for both of you, actually, I understand the concern that American citizens might have had as far as their the tax-paying citizens are concerned, and where their money is going, where their money is being spent is concerned. But, from the Indian perspective, for example, you say that there was election meddling and perhaps the Biden administration wanted somebody else to be elected in India. But you don't substantiate that with proof. Give us details. Give us more details of who got how much, and who were the recipients of this US aid. That hasn't been given out, and therefore the critics of Donald Trump say that then how should we believe the claims of the US president?
Well, look, the numbers don't lie. So you have the $21 million there, and it said specifically what the funds were used for, and that's for voter turnout in India. So we are investigating that now. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. It's also very interesting to see how it plays out in Brazil and other countries as well. And it's very important to understand that Washington, D.C. and the federal government there, including USAID, is 95 to 97% Democrat run. So it's not a bipartisan organization there at all. So when they're giving that money across the field, it's not going to bipartisan organizations in India, for example. It's going to people that are like-minded and on, like-minded from a political sense. So, it'll be interesting to see where that's going. I mean, in my opinion, that money should never have gone to, Indian election in the first place. I think that could have been, spent in other ways. That's what we're investigating. And it's the other thing is when it's to do with health and all that, that is a legitimate concern, and we are not stopping it completely, but we are restructuring so we can administer aid in a more efficient way, in a streamlined approach. The days of
Okay. Dr. Richard, and, let's put out those graphics again of which presidency gave India more aid. We've got the Biden administration giving the highest, which is about $163 million. We've also got numbers of the Bush, Obama, and Trump administration. The Bush administration had $142 million, Obama had $90 million, and Trump had $87 million being given to India. But what my question is that there are concerns that in the name of strengthening democracy, the Republicans have blamed the Democrats very many times of meddling into the elections of other countries. Do you believe that happened? Do you believe the fact that, the Democrats were involved in several regime changes across the world?
Well, I wouldn't devolve into conspiratorial theories about who's doing what, but I think it is clear. I mean, again, Presidents Obama and Biden really made clear their distaste or dislike or their differences with Prime Minister Modi, just as with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel. And it makes a lot of sense to American people that they're the people they appointed, the deep state, the bureaucrats would not have any problem getting through grants to groups that take the opposite view in India or, for instance, Israel. So it kind of passes a smell test. Now, as far as details, that's going to come. At first, the first thing they're doing is identifying just how much money we're spending. In the last 2 years, just 2 years alone, USAID, which is the biggest funder of any kind of all kinds of foreign aid from the U.S., the last 2 years alone, they spent about $75 billion of U.S. taxpayer money. With the inflationary pressures, with a growing deficit that we have to get under control, it really is time for us to take a look at what programs make sense and what programs don't. And I have a great deal of faith, certainly in President Trump and more specifically in Secretary of State Rubio, under whom all these programs now exist, that in fact that assessment's going to be made. And those programs that help the United States, help the American people who are paying for this, which, by the way, humanitarianism sometimes falls in that category of helping us further our values. But those programs that do that, I think you're going to see they're going to be reinstated and they're going to be strengthened. But like everything else, as we expect, they will be under audit. And those programs that do things that really don't do anything to help the United States and the American people, they're not going to be funded by U.S. taxpayers anymore. But I'm anxious to see that process take place. But in the meantime, I think it's great that through USAID and others, the administration is trying to get massive government spending under control.
But can I also then ask you, Dr. Richard, there are concerns from several countries that have been echoing that a lot of their healthcare and education and social welfare programs will be impacted deeply with the kind of cuts that US aid is witnessing under the Trump administration. How do you respond to them then?
Well, I think as an American taxpayer, my question would be, well, if someone said, you give us the details, exactly what are you being deprived of, and can these same goals be achieved without massive amounts of U.S. taxpayer dollars? I don't think these are unreasonable questions to ask. Beyond that, and I've worked with a lot of these agencies, a pause is really not going to make the difference, cause the death that people are crying about and complaining about. However, more importantly, there generally isn't any of these things a waiver process. And we in fact saw the administration reverse certain firings when it became clear that those people really were needed. So again, my response to those countries would be, well, get specific. And let's see, do you really need that massive injection of U.S. taxpayer money in order to accomplish the same goals? The answer might be yes. The answer might be no. We don't know that because no one's been asking these questions for years.
Okay. Dr. Michael Owens, I believe, is back with us on the broadcast. Dr. Michael Owens, if you can hear me, how do you respond to the allegations by Republicans that the Democrats have only wasted American taxpayers' money under U.S. aid, and a lot of it has been used to create instability in governments across the world? Could you unmute yourself, Dr. Michael?
Well-respected programs. Yes, I'm here. USAID has been one of the most well-respected programs across the world for decades now. The work they've done in countries such as Africa and others has been a pillar to helping to ensure that the world feeds the world's hungry, to help prevent failed states. I work with this organization called Truman National Security Project that really delves into how diplomacy works, and diplomacy works best when you're reaching out your hand in aid, AID. Trump has taken this standpoint that America first and American only really is his mantra, and we know how he likes to throw around allegations and quite frankly sometimes absurdities. But unfortunately, a lot of these things remain unfounded and untruth. And, he's more than willing to say that. And then it's like, okay, let's go find out the truth later. I am really concerned that how this will impact other countries, how this is impacting us here in the U.S., as we're still reeling from a lot of these decisions that every day, the American people are waking up trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And so it's troubling. But I think that, we have to continue to look at how we can best help people around the world, at the same time help people here in the U.S. And both things can be true, and we can do both things. And I'm just concerned that, the Trump administration is not going to help us get there, and only go to help role that we have in the world of being great partners.
Let me get David Sofair to respond to you, Dr. Owens. Yeah, David, you want to respond to Dr. Owens, what he's saying?
Sure, I'd love to. First of all, we're not saying that USAID should go away. We're trying to trim the fat. Now, that fat is, promoting transgender rights in Nicaragua, or is that, Sesame Street in Baghdad? All these things have a price, and it has a line item price at the expense of the American taxpayer. Now, when we talk about Africa, a lot of that money goes to Africa to help the people in Africa. A lot, for every million they spend, a lot of it gets wasted, misappropriated, or downright not implemented in a great way. So we are streamlining the process of USAID of wasteful spending. We are making aid. They've got to have we've got to administer it in a safer way, in a more efficient way, so it's not wasted on these absurd partisan programs. And there's a lot of that. So that's really what the debate is about. I mean, just the whole thing, there's 10,000 employees there. I mean, why should that be there? If you look at America's national deficit, it's huge. It's ballooning every day. So we found a way where if we cut $3 billion a day, we will no longer have a national debt, and we will promote the country by giving every American a one-off payment of about $5,000. So this is what we're doing. We're growing. We're making America efficient again. And we are investigating government bureaucracy. And I'll tell you what, government bureaucracy does not help a democracy, okay? We saw that during the Biden administration. 3 new wars, unprecedented spending, restrictions on everything, rampant anti-American and anti-democracy sentiment around the world. So that's we've got a lot to clean up here. So, and USAID is one of those things which we have to minimize and streamline so we can have it fair and we can actually have it to the people that need help, not to opera houses and Sesame Street in Baghdad or the BBC. Okay.
David Sofair, since you mentioned the Oprah, let me take this to Dr. Wenz. And I'm sure, Dr. Wenz, you've heard about the lists of reasons and the lists of expenditures that the White House has taken out. But for the benefit of my viewers, let me list out some of the expenditures that the White House has said were done under the Biden administration under USAID. One of them was $10 million in food aid that reached the Al-Qaeda-linked group. There was $7.9 million for gender training in Sri Lanka, $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala. Then there was a $70,000 aid for DEI musical in Ireland and a $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. That's the White House listing out the kind of expenditures that were done under USAID. How would you then justify that these are being done for social welfare, for strengthening democracies, and for helping out people?
The other
Dr.
thing
Wenz?
is
Very small number of items that's really been listed for this entire program of work that USAID does across the world. So pulling out, 6 or 7 things does not come close to explaining the scope and scale of what USAID does. Furthermore, the work that's done in diplomacy delivers itself in a multifaceted way of different ways that we have to go through to ensure that the U.S. government is helping not only other countries but other communities, other people, and but again, the mantra here is about politics. This is not about playing the role of politics. This is about helping prevent failed states. This is about helping stabilize other countries and helping to make sure we're promoting U.S. interests in other countries. That is what diplomacy is about, and USAID is a key piece in doing that. Now, the idea of government wasteful spending. Look, I am a mayor in Georgia, in the U.S. Every single day, I wake up and make sure that every dollar that our city has is going towards things that are vitally needed or things to improve the quality of life in our city. So I understand the need to have an efficient government, but what I don't understand is completely throwing away programs that have done so much good around the world simply to meet a goal of some sort of efficiency that no one even understands really what this is or where within this scope or scale that we're trying to do. Let's completely cut out the program and then figure out how it works later. No, you take a surgical approach to it, you review everything that's going on, and then you start to take corrective steps. And that's not happening with Elon Musk. That's not happening with President Trump. They're targeting programs that are benefiting people strategically in certain parts of the country or certain parts of the world that they do not want to help. That's been a pattern. We saw that in the first Trump 1.0, and we're seeing that again in Trump 2.0.
Dr. Richard, do you want to come in on this? Why make such a big deal out of the US aid that was done under Biden administration when it was only furthering American interests in different countries and ensuring that there is healthy, constructive diplomatic relationship between the US and different countries of the world?
I'm sorry, who are you addressing?
Dr. Richard, are you able to hear me? Yes, this is for you, Dr. Richard.
Okay. I really like the graphics that you've been putting up during this conversation, because the real question is, all this money we're spending, is it effective or is it not effective? And I think you're showing in a lot of ways it's not very effective. Part of it has to do with perhaps the assumptions that we as foreigners bring to this process and say, well, we think this might be good for this country or that might be good for, and it might not be something that's effective. And I think, again, your graphics are showing that. I also will tell you, look, I spend a lot of time in Bangladesh, and I've seen what's happened, where there's so many really important efforts that could be funded by these programs, but aren't, or completely ignored. For instance, the encroaching power of the Chinese Communist Party in Bangladesh, for instance. There are all kinds of ways to slow that down, but nothing to do. Instead, we get a $20 million plus giveaway that seems, if you look at what's going on next door in Bangladesh, it seems to really hasn't been doing much good. Again, I wish people would get off the focus on, oh, we have this great agency. Instead, focus on the programs. What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? What should I, as an American taxpayer, be paying for? And what really is something we don't need? Either it's not getting the job done, or it furthers a goal that's not in tune. I'll also mention to Mr. Owens, I'll quote former Democratic President Barack Obama, who told Republican adversaries that elections have consequences. Well, we've just seen an election whereby a majority of the voters, for the first time in 20 years, voted for the Republican candidate. And one of the big reasons was to get government spending in check, pay for the good programs, of course, the ones that are helping us, but stop spending money on things that don't. I don't think the majority of the American people are waking up every day wondering what's going to happen next. And if you look at the continuous polls by groups on the left or on the right in the United States showing a high level of approval for what the president and the administration is doing with regard to government spending, I think that belies the suggestion that the American people are waking up confused. Again, let's look at the process. I feel much better of it being administered by one of the brightest minds in Washington, and that's Secretary of State Rubio, than by some group of unknown bureaucrats.
Okay, so we'll have to wait and watch how effective Donald Trump and his administration's what Donald Trump and his administration are doing here with USAID. We'll have to wait and watch how effective that would be. But I'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much to all of you gentlemen, David Sofair, Dr. Michael Owens, and Dr. Richard Benkin, for joining us and sharing your perspective. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it's a wrap on Global Mirror. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Bye-bye. Up next is Neha Koshi with Beyond the Headline.